It wasn't difficult to persuade them to disguise themselves as a caravan and enter the cross guard in 2 days at dawn.
I have a bad feeling about this.
It was the same reason as when they suggested scaling the wall. Torres supported the idea, and Finn nodded nonchalantly.
Then I guess we'll stay here for tonight.
They were camped in a dugout. Hearing the news, the cooks smiled and said,
"Should we bring that out for dinner then?"
Led by Ranger Finn, the forward scout unit had been stationed here for an average of 6 months on operations. Sometimes they returned after only a month or two if something urgent came up, but they had been here for 8 months already. Over time, they had tried all sorts of things, including curing the meat of captured animals to make ham.
"Shall we have a drink then?"
Finn responded excitedly. Despite being a unit that should have been more on edge than those on the front lines, it was hard to tell if their nerves were dulled or if they had thick skin.
Maybe they're more sensitive on normal days for times like this.
They were careful not to let smoke rise from the area they used as a dining hall, and took turns patrolling in a large circle to keep watch. 2 keen-eyed members always watched the perimeter. Watching this scout unit, a saying they had heard before came to mind.
If you're always straight, you'll break easily. You need to know how to bend softly when needed.
Who had said that? It wasn't an instructor. It was a paladin from a religious order who was traveling through the region. He said he didn't have time to give proper instruction, so he offered a brief but intense training session instead. With his hearty laugh and habit of stroking his beard, he looked more like a bandit than a clergyman. But he was a respected religious figure and a skilled warrior.
Bending doesn't mean you're weak. If your core is strong, you won't break easily. Want me to explain in simple terms? It means stop being so stubborn.
Apparently, they had said it sounded like he was shouting angrily whenever he swung his sword. Maybe that's why he suddenly felt curious about how his swordplay appeared. He moved as his heart desired.
Why's he acting like that when we just talked about having a drink?
Finn muttered as she received the bottle of stashed liquor from a member who had just fetched it. Enkrid, who had stood up, drew his sword and swung it. It wasn't related to anything that had happened today, or something he had recently learned. It was just a stroke born of curiosity. The paladin who had confronted Enkrid had said he sounded like he was shouting in desperation every time he swung his sword, as if insisting he couldn't break.
You need to use your muscles softly to let the sword flow better.
The face of the squad member overlapped with the laughing paladin's face. Hundreds of sparring sessions. How was Rem during those sessions? His muscles were pure elasticity. The basis of his ability to handle the axe freely was a sense of ease, because he believed he wouldn't lose.
No.
His forearms and axe bending like a whip, Rem's face, his supple muscles, all combined to give the answer.
He used just enough strength when needed.
How about Ragna? His seemingly weak gestures yet absurdly skilled swordsmanship. The same went for Jackson and Auden. Despite his stiff demeanor, Jackson always had a sense of ease. Auden would twist Enkrid's arms this way and that, teasing him but also offering advice. And what about himself?
Shoulders.
No, he fought with his whole body tensed, even when connecting the dots, because he always had to give his all, because anything less than the best was meaningless. This meant his shoulders were always tense. Enkrid swung his sword in the air. The swing was far less forceful than usual, almost empty.
This is just relaxing the muscles.
Relaxing the body doesn't mean diminishing the power of swordsmanship. He began to vaguely see the method, the path, the signposts. Knowing doesn't mean you can immediately do it. He knew this all too well. Enkrid was painfully aware of his own talent. He merely realized that he needed to relax his shoulders. But even this realization made his heart pound with excitement. Joy and exhilaration filled his entire being. Just knowing he could walk straight brought the joy of seeing the path ahead. For Enkrid, the sword was life, and life was the sword, a companion walking towards his dreams. And with this joy came a question.
Is desperation the only answer?
He had always resolved not to waste today for the sake of tomorrow. He had steeled his mind countless times. Enduring and desperately struggling wasn't difficult, so he had done it that way.
But it's not always necessary.
With his thoughts, he swung his sword down. The sound of the blade cutting through the air was different from before. Hearing this, a faint smile appeared on Enkrid's face. That sword stroke just now. He felt a sense of nostalgia from that simple downward swing. When was it? It was in the tall grass field with Andrew and Enkrid, the commonly known cut that doesn't feel in the hand, that strike that those called geniuses achieve countless times. Had there been an opponent before him just now, he could have cut through without even feeling it in his hands. Despite countless attempts to replicate that same sensation, he had never been able to perform that cut that doesn't feel in the hand again.
It's happening.
To think that this strike had come from his hand now, how could he not be happy about this?
That stroke just now seemed a bit different.
Finn remarked.
Indeed, it was an unusual cut.
Torres added, sitting alongside Finn, both observing. They both had a keen eye. Finn continued.
But is he really okay? Why does he keep grinning to himself?
Don't ask me. I've only seen him a few times. He's famous back at the main unit for being a bit odd.
Enkrid lightly ignored their conversation. He just wanted to swing his sword again and again, and as he did, he continued to think.
Even if you're desperate.
What about desperation without tension in the shoulders? It wasn't just about struggling desperately every day. Shouting in anger wasn't the only way. What was important? Taking steps forward towards tomorrow, the mindset, and gaining everything possible along the way. It was an enlightenment, a realization, a new learning, and while smiling with joy at this thought,
With a face like that, he can smile like that and still look fine. Normally, he'd look like a madman, but why does it seem fitting?
Finn said, taking another drink.
And what about me?
Torres interjected, oblivious to the topic. He was promptly ignored. A few squad members laughed and patted him on the shoulder. Though they had only known each other for a few days, they quickly became close. As Enkrid continued to swing his sword vigorously, Finn, Torres, and a few others shared a few drinks. There wasn't much to drink, and it wasn't strong liquor either. It was cheap fruit wine that could be easily found in the city. As they ate a few slices of the ham they had cured and smoked in the makeshift dining area in the forest,
You should open a restaurant.
someone quipped. These words naturally came to the scout, whose dream was to become a cook. Enkrid didn't even get a sip of the drink. He didn't intend to drink today anyway, but even if he wanted to, there wasn't anything left to drink. While he was swinging his sword and washing up, the rest had quickly finished it off.
What's the matter? You think you can drink with that face too?
Torres grumbled for no reason, though not in the mood for laughter and chatter. It was a time to unwind a bit. Of course, there were always a few who stayed alert, like antennae on edge. Finn was one of those. She had taken a sip or two, but she was responsible for everyone. Thus passed the day, and night returned to the dugout. Whether heading to the burrow they called the rabbit hole, or going to the wall, no one should have stayed here tonight. When Finn left, they were supposed to empty the camp and regroup closer to the main unit. All plans changed when they decided to disguise themselves as a caravan, and the night that shouldn't have existed arrived. 2 moons rose, casting a blue light around. Before entering the dugout, Enkrid looked up at the 2 moons. The large round moon was always visible, while the second, smaller moon only appeared during the full moon.
Bright.
The surroundings were clear. Staying up all night would just repeat today. He had already learned this while digging under a cobbler's shop in the city, so struggling to stay awake was pointless. He decided to rest his eyes to avoid unnecessary fatigue. Just as the deep night began, compared to yesterday, it was around the time they had reached the front of the wall. A cry rang out from quite close. Enkrid had a rough idea why his 6th sense hadn't activated when he was killed by the wizard. The reason for the absence of a sense of foreboding.
When spells are at work.
While climbing the wall, a wizard with rose vines or thorns had been above him. Because she had cast spells, he couldn't sense anything from above. He hadn't heard or felt the danger. But now?
Damn, wake up, emergency.
It was the cry of a scout on guard duty. The howl of wolves, the warning shout of a soldier followed by a sound. Tat, tat, tat. It was the sound of something rushing, and then a beast appeared, silhouetted against the moonlight. There is a race known as beast folk living at the eastern edge of the continent, a unique species with characteristics of both humans and beasts. The beast that appeared now was known as a failed creation of these beast folk. Being a failed creation of the Creator, they always craved blood and harbored hatred for humans. It was the owner of the howl. Their ankles jutted backward as if they were standing on their toes. Covered in gray fur, their yellow eyes gleamed with a beastly glare. A pronounced snout protruded, revealing sharp fangs. The creature, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a lycanthrope, commonly known as a werewolf. As expected, since they weren't a part of the beastfolk race, they couldn't communicate like most monsters. The one leading the pack had a distinctive scar running across its left eye, leaving it blind in that eye. With its single remaining yellow eye, it surveyed the area and opened its mouth.
Ka.
The monster's cry rang out. To Enkrid, it sounded like a command to charge.
Stay alert.
He shouted reflexively. How would this night end? He thought it was a 50-50 chance. Either it would be a night where nothing happened because they didn't take any risks, or something would happen. The result was the latter. Werewolves, and not just one or two. Besides the one in the lead, the others scattered in all directions. Despite the bright moonlight, it was hard to spot them at a glance. All that remained were shadows darting across the darkness with the sound of paws hitting the ground. Between the trees and in the places where the moonlight was obscured, yellow eyes gleamed like lines. The werewolves under the moonlight circled the clustered humans. They ran so fast that they seemed like afterimages.
Damn.
Enkrid realized something else here, a sense of foreboding. Why hadn't he felt any sense of danger? Why had Finn, a veteran, been so late in noticing the approach of the werewolves?
They must have used some trick.
It meant that there was likely a wizard involved here too. The fact that werewolves had gathered and come in such numbers was unusual. He didn't know what trickery the wizard had used. The results were clear before his eyes. There were over 10 of them, even from a rough count.
Over 10 of them. This isn't good.
Torres spoke as they stood back to back. Enkrid drew his sword as well. With his back against Torres, he decided to think later. While he had planned to struggle just enough to survive, he couldn't just die quietly.
No, that's not an option.
As always, he would take a step towards tomorrow. Enkrid steeled himself and held his sword steady. The name of the creature was lycanthrope, a monster imbued with magical power in its heart. It was a far more challenging adversary than a ghoul, the flesh-eating undead. To take down even a single werewolf typically required an entire trained squad. Attempting to hunt with fewer numbers was not recommended. It would likely result in severe injuries or deaths, and if lycanthropes formed a pack, it was advised not to engage even with a platoon. But now it seemed.
Ha, there must be over 20 of them.
The number had increased even in that brief moment. There were 10 scouts, including himself and Torres. The werewolves numbered over 20, and, as if to prove Enkrid's suspicion of a wizard's involvement, they were surrounded and under attack. Werewolves, a difficult adversary, even when driven by primal instincts, were even stronger on nights when the dual moons were out. And now they were launching a coordinated attack. How could one describe this situation?
We're gonna die, aren't we?
Torres's sarcastic remark was his answer. There was no way out. Enkrid fought valiantly, killing 3 werewolves and severing the arm of a 4th. During the chaos, he managed to throw a whistling dagger at the one-eyed leader, making 2 new friends for the creature. It was truly a fierce battle. This was the aftermath of fighting a pack of lycanthropes. Torres had a similar fate. He fell before Enkrid, but not before taking down 2 werewolves himself. Finn managed to kill one before succumbing to the second. The other members fared no better. Enkrid, bleeding profusely, let his injured arm hang limp. As he turned to deliver a final blow, he stumbled over something at his feet. It was the head of the scout who had dreamed of becoming a cook.
This is a bit annoying.
Even knowing that death would reset the day, seeing such things wasn't exactly pleasant.
Ruarg.
6 werewolves pounced on Enkrid at once. Surviving was out of the question. It was the first time he experienced being torn apart. Naturally, it was a painful ordeal. As time passed in agony, he eventually closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the pain was gone. He saw a black river, silently rippling. Floating on the river was a small boat with a ferryman.
What is more enjoyable?
Being shot with an arrow and dying skewered, being strangled by a wizard's vine and pricked by thorns, being torn apart by a pack of lycanthropes. The ferryman appeared and spoke with a laugh. It was a laugh that could be perceived only because he allowed it. It was strangely fascinating. How should one describe this? It was as if someone was telling them that the ferryman laughed. They knew the ferryman was laughing, but they neither saw the laughing face nor heard the sound of laughter. They only perceived in their mind that the ferryman laughed. Having heard the question, Enkrid answered. Towards the Black River, the boat, and the ferryman. He couldn't tell whether his answer was directed at the ferryman, the boat, or the Black River. Yet he could still open his mouth to speak.
An arrow is the best option.
Being torn apart by a pack of lycanthropes, or being strangled by a wizard's vine was worse.
Go mad. In such madness you must entertain me.
Did the ferryman's words falter for a moment, or was it just an illusion? Enkrid wasn't mad. Not at all. He just answered because there was no need to hesitate.
I answered coldly.
Crazy bastard.
The ferryman began with laughter and ended with anger. Of course, this also seemed as if someone was telling him. Whether the ferryman was truly angry was unknown. He just perceived that the ferryman was irritated. And that was the end of it. The black darkness spread over the Black River. He closed and opened his eyes. It was dawn before the sunrise, still the same today. Enkrid stood up lightly. There was no heaviness in his body or mind. Of course, there was still the pain from being torn apart and having his insides ripped by a werewolf's claws.
Sigh.
He decided to forget it with a sigh. Even if he couldn't truly forget, moving his body and swinging his sword would make it okay. Enkrid was calm, both in attitude and mind.
Relax your shoulders.
Normally he would be scrambling, almost desperately, to survive and escape today. But Enkrid was serene, like a quiet lake. Hadn't he realized something new?
Is desperation the only answer?
No, it wasn't. Walking towards tomorrow remained the same. However, running at full speed wasn't necessarily the fastest path, and there was no absolute need to get there the fastest.
There are 3 paths.
He got up and moved his body as usual, starting to organize his thoughts. The beginning was the lycanthropes.
Those guys too.
It was strange. They seemed to be acting under someone's command, or had experienced such a situation before.
It must be the wizard's doing.
This wizard was on a different level from the one he had encountered before.
Lesha of the Rose Vines.
The name he had heard stood out clearly in his mind. Could he catch them? There was no need to ask such a question, because he had to catch them. His thoughts then shifted to the pack of lycanthropes. He was reviewing what he had experienced in reverse order.
It's a scheme by the wizard.
It was a certainty. When he tried to scale the wall, the wizard was there to greet him. When he aimed for the gap, a unit blocked him from front and back. In front there were elite soldiers armed with broad shields and long spears, while the back was blocked by an archer unit, perfectly prepared.
They couldn't have known without prior information.
He didn't know how it all worked out, but the conclusion was that the enemy had already read his movements. So, was there a spy? If there was, there would have been some indication during the lycanthrope attack. Information might have been leaked in another way. It was a situation the ferryman could laugh at. All 3 paths seemed like walls. These were not walls that could simply be overcome through training.
Should I call it bad luck?
How is it that there are always situations that could lead to death? However, does bad luck change anything? No. Enkrid was the same, unchanged. His mind remained steady. Enkrid retied the grip of his sword. It was a sign that he was starting a new day. Enkrid mentally divided his morning schedule. He moved according to that plan. After practicing the isolation technique, he trained in swordsmanship. Then he practiced with the hidden knife again.
Up for a sparring match?
He asked Finn to train in Valaf-style martial arts.
Is someone after you? You seem in a hurry today.
Torres said while checking his equipment. How many knives did he have hidden on his body? Enkrid watched Torres strap on a belt with 8 knives and responded.
Just doing my best every day.
You'll wear yourself out like that.
A body like his wouldn't be worn out by such things.
Shall we go then?
Finn, who had been sparring with him all morning, said. It was also the point when Enkrid's training, which had started at dawn, ended. He couldn't go drenched in sweat, so he quickly changed clothes and headed out. On the way, Finn mentioned that the Aspen scouting party was hard to spot. It was something Enkrid had already heard. Pushing through the bushes, Finn commented on the seemingly edible berries.
Those are poisonous.
Better be careful then.
Enkrid immediately replied.
You're quite interesting.
In what way?
Torres, who was cutting through the bushes with a dagger, chimed in.
You act like you know things as if you've been here before.
Was this a woman's intuition or a ranger's instinct?
It's my first time.
Speak comfortably.
All right.
Would he say the same small talk again? In the first today he did. Fortunately or not, Finn didn't bring it up. Instead, he just gave Enkrid a peculiar look. Even if today repeated, not everything happened the same way. A few small things would change, and so they arrived at the entrance of the gap.
How deep is it here?
Just before entering, Enkrid asked.
If we walk diligently, it won't even take an hour.
I see.
Why do you ask?
Just curious.
Are you scared of the dark? Don't worry, Big Sigister will hold your hand.
It's not that.
Finn chuckled and spoke up.
The ranger goes first.
They descended the path, using the slope as a shield. The same thing as before happened. Enkrid didn't give the two any specific warnings or preparations. Instead, he remembered everything that happened.
What should we do if we get surrounded?
He had never asked such a question to any of his squad members. This means he hadn't learned from them. But he did know one thing from experience. Avoiding such a situation was key. If it could be avoided, then that was the right course of action. But what if it couldn't be avoided? That was something to ponder from now on. Enkrid was searching for an answer.
Come on.
The enemy appeared, a unit armed with spears and shields. At least 2 squads, by the looks of it. Several torches lit up the scene ahead. Creak, as if waiting for this moment, a group of enemy soldiers armed with short bows blocked the rear.
Looks like there are about 20 here as well.
He turned his gaze back to the front and saw someone who appeared to be the commander. This person had their head poking out between shields, wearing a steel helmet that covered their forehead, leaving only their eyes visible. Though faint, there was a hint of exhilaration in their eyes. They seemed to be relishing the situation.
Wildcat woman.
The commander spoke.
Damn it.
Finn muttered, turning her head back and forth, then drew a dagger, gripping it in reverse and lowering her stance. Her left hand was angled in front of her face, while her right hand was pulled back, hiding the knife from the enemy's view. She indeed looked like a wildcat hiding its claws. Torres moved quietly alongside the shadow cast by the torches. Some of the soldiers with short bows had their eyes on Torres.
They have sharp eyes.
It showed they were well-trained soldiers. As expected, once caught in the trap, there was no escape. It was the kind of trap that even knights couldn't escape from. Finn and Torres were both excellent fighters. If only they weren't in a cave, if only they weren't blocked from both sides.
Then we might stand a chance.
But no, resisting would only lead to death, just as the commander was about to shout something.
Wait.
Enkrid stepped forward, showing his left palm. He hadn't drawn his sword, signaling that he had no intention of fighting.
They don't seem like the kind who can be reasoned with.
Torres muttered. Finn, meanwhile, continued to glare fiercely ahead.
What is it?
The commander's relaxed demeanor came from his certainty of having them caught. He asked.
What is it?
Enkrid needed to close the distance with the enemy. As Torres had said, they were not the kind to be reasoned with. He just needed a moment's respite. Before the fight began, and before the enemy moved violently, there was something to confirm. Step by step, Enkrid walked forward with his hands raised, signaling that he had no intention of fighting. His eyes scrutinized the enemy's armor and clothing, now clearly visible in the torchlight.
Dust.
It had accumulated quite a bit. This gap was just over an hour's walk. The dust on the enemy soldiers didn't seem to have accumulated just today.
They didn't just wait today.
So his question was meant to confirm something.
How many days have you been waiting?
What?
The commander's voice had a note of surprise, as if struck by the unexpected question. That was a confirmation.
They weren't just waiting in certainty.
What could it be that kept them waiting here? He was curious, but curiosity wasn't the priority right now. The outcome was the fact that these soldiers had been waiting here for days.
You've hidden your presence well.
Enkrid spoke again, testing the enemy with every word. The commander didn't seem to grasp this.
You bastard. Who are you? Are you a wizard too?
Was there another wizard involved here? What exactly was that woman Lesha of the Rose Vines up to?
Lesha, is it?
He decided to push a bit further.
Damn it, I don't know what you're on about, but die.
That was as far as the conversation went. Soon the enemy soldiers charged, and arrows and spears targeted Enkrid, Finn, and Torres. The commander gestured commands to his troops and retreated. Finn looked as if she wanted to kill that commander, but she didn't have the skill to break through the soldiers with shields and long spears blocking the way. Her skills were not suited for this kind of situation, making her seem only as capable as an ordinary soldier. Torres was different. He kicked off a wall, performing unexpected maneuvers, and flicked his hand in midair. 4 throwing knives flew from his hand. Even Enkrid couldn't clearly see where they were headed. It was a hidden move from Torres, but it wasn't enough. Even the archers and those blocking the front were fully covered with thick leather shields.
If you're going to aim, you might as well target their toes or something.
That was it. Putting aside the solution to get over the wall, Enkrid decided to execute what he had planned, facing well-trained elite soldiers, and many of them at that. This moment was a very unfamiliar experience for Enkrid. There had never been a time when a group of fighters less skilled than himself targeted him in such numbers, because they simply wouldn't have had the skill. Over time, he had increased his swordsmanship. He had killed the perverted stabber and cut down Mitch Hurrier. Assassins had targeted him as well. But this was truly a first, fighting as a minority against a group, a unit, a force. On a battlefield, he might have been able to use allies around him, but here there was no such opportunity.
In that case,
Could this not actually be a chance to improve his skills? Thinking this way,
interesting.
he muttered to himself.
This crazy bastard.
A spearman, looking appalled, thrust his spear at the smiling Enkrid. Seeing someone muttering that it was interesting and laughing with blood dripping from their mouth just before death would not have seemed normal. Of course, Enkrid didn't care about that. He was only full of thoughts about trying various things.
Focus point and sense of the blade alone won't work.
Narrowing his vision against multiple enemies would lead to a dead end. Could he cut and crush them like he did with groups of ghouls, packs of wolf beasts, or human-faced hounds?
No, it won't work.
The enemy was not a wild beast, but a unit capable of employing strategy and tactics. Enkrid used his head and thought things through. It was as usual. The only difference was that he was a bit more relaxed than before. For several days, he tried to enter through the gap, but when that didn't work, he went to meet the wizard on the wall. When he was blocked while grappling with Lesha's vines, he danced with the werewolves under the moonlight. Of course, the end of that dance was always death. Enkrid had resolved himself, so he did not feel impatient. He simply gave his best effort in every moment. Just because he was more relaxed didn't mean he would waste a day. After 42 repetitions of the same day, he mastered the hidden knife technique.
How did you do that?
Naturally, Torres looked at him with wide eyes. To him it seemed as if Enkrid had mimicked his secret technique in just one day.
Just lucky, I guess.
It was a poor excuse, but Torres had nothing more to say.
In just one day?
He could only mutter such words. Since showing it off to Torres wouldn't further his mastery of the hidden knife, Enkrid continued to practice on his own beyond the 42nd repetition, even beyond 70 times. He spared Torres the discomfort of watching him demonstrate the hidden knife's technique anymore. He just kept practicing it alone. Day by day, he also improved in Valaf-style martial arts. This was thanks to sparring with Finn, who was skilled in Ael'Kara's-style martial arts. And so, after repeating today over and over again, Enkrid felt that he no longer needed to repeat the hidden knife, Valaf-style martial arts, dealing with the wizard on the wall, building grip strength by climbing the wall, or training his swordsmanship against the pack of lycanthropes.
Everything.
There was no need to repeat it anymore. So what was next? It was time to move beyond today and head towards tomorrow. The goddess of luck must have cursed me, thought Enkrid, looking up at the sky. The blue moon filled his vision. It was still before dawn, and having woken up early, he could still see the moon he saw before sleeping. The moon was indeed bright.
Come to think of it, isn't it true?
In his dreams, there's a ferryman and a wall, but no matter what, he keeps dying in unlucky ways. This time was no different. He tried to exploit a gap in the enemy formation several times, but luck never seemed to be on his side. He aimed for a weak spot, struck at a spearman's foot, and charged in, only to have a mound of earth suddenly collapse over his head. Why did part of the ceiling have to collapse at that moment? And why did the falling dirt have to get in his eyes? It was the same afterward. He ran along the castle wall targeting a wizard, but part of the wall which had been holding up until then suddenly crumbled, removing his foothold. Other similar misfortunes followed. Once, he found that the heart of a lycanthrope was on the opposite side, perhaps because it was a mutant. While catching his breath during a fight, he leaned against a tree, only to find it rotten and unable to support him, causing him to lose balance. Such unlucky events were not a one-time occurrence. From being born without innate talent, wasn't that also a form of bad luck? Is the goddess playing tricks on me? He wanted to ask, though he knew there would be no answer. It wasn't a question he expected an answer to. It was just a way to mark the start of a new day. Today began with greeting the goddess. He got up and started training with the isolation technique. He walked in a crouched stance, one knee bent, almost touching the ground with the other. As he focused on his training, others began to wake and move. Enkrid caught one of the scouts and asked,
Can you make something like this? I need a pouch to use as an emergency fund.
He explained that it was a cloth pouch he wanted to keep inside his sleeve. It would be even better if it could be fixed in place. Since they even made ham in their spare time, they had various tools and didn't need to gather materials.
Sure, it can be done quickly. But don't you have to leave soon?
It would be nice if you could make it before that.
Enkrid said. The scout blinked and nodded.
Okay, I'll do it. Hey, can you cover my shift?
The scout was generous. Enkrid thanked him with a pat on the shoulder. After finishing his training, Finn approached.
Are you giving us a good show this morning?
He was referring to Enkrid practicing with his sword shirtless.
Can you use a crossbow? Is that even a question? It's basic training for a ranger.
Enkrid anticipated the response and replied,
I was just asking.
I don't really have a response to that.
How do you make your footsteps so quiet? By putting something under your boots.
Enkrid asked.
Oh, this? There are a lot of sensitive beasts around here, Finn replied, gesturing to her ear with her left hand. So, I double-layer cloth on the soles and put cotton inside the boots.
Enkrid didn't ask because he didn't know.
That sounds good. I'd like to do that with my boots as well.
It's not difficult.
Tors? Enkrid called.
Do you want me to do it too? There are a lot of beasts around after all.
Finn added, although the likelihood of encountering them was low. Two of the team members began modifying the boots.
These boots are very meticulously made. You can tell a lot of care went into them.
Really? Enkrid responded, pleased. The boots had been crafted with effort by a shoemaker they met, thanks to a body enthusiast in the sewers. It was a compliment he appreciated. It didn't take long to add layers of cloth to the soles and stuff the inside with cotton. Training was finished, and the soundless boots were ready.
Here.
One of the scouts handed over the pouch. Enkrid had requested earlier in the morning. The pouch could be hidden inside his sleeve by looping it around the wrist and tightening the cord. It was stitched very finely, better than what their squad leader, who liked to drink, could do. Enkrid had known about the scout's sewing skills beforehand, having tried everyone out. Finn's attempt had been the worst. It would have been better if she hadn't tried at all, given her lack of skill. The pouch she made was so misshapen it barely fit a finger inside and was unusable.
Haha, it's been a while since I sewed.
Finn had said, laughing it off. Such days had been a tough start. On this particular morning, Finn, who had once given Enkrid a hard start with her sewing, came over and patted him on the shoulder.
Let's go.
Breakfast was over, and preparations were complete. They were heading towards the tunnel again. The 79th time. Enkrid counted the repeated days as he walked briskly. He knew the path well, having walked it countless times. Finn occasionally glanced back and, noticing Enkrid's stride, asked with a curious tilt of his head,
Did you work as a scout for a long time?
Me?
Torres asked before turning his gaze to Enkrid. No, Enkrid replied as they walked.
Really?
Torres seemed puzzled by the question, but Enkrid knew exactly why it was asked. He knew what Finn would say next if pressed.
Your walk is different, like that of a ranger.
That's the answer.
Enkrid said. What else had he been doing, trailing behind Finn all this time? He had observed her walk and mimicked it. It was a ranger's walk, using the cloth beneath their boots to move silently. As they continued walking quietly along a dirt path, occasionally covered with grass, Enkrid asked,
What if the enemy is waiting at the tunnel?
It was a sudden question but a valid concern.
We fight.
Torres answered first, kicking a pebble in front of him. The stone skidded and bounced off a flat yellowish rock. Enkrid carefully watched where the stone landed, listening intently.
The chances are slim, but if they are, we just run.
Finn responded, seemingly prepared for the question.
I see.
Enkrid replied briefly. As they reached a hillock covered with bushes, Enkrid asked another question.
What if our retreat is cut off?
Torres, who had just stepped onto the hillock, looked puzzled, wondering why Enkrid was asking these questions. The mission was simple. Get inside, check the status of the cat planted by their allies, and if things went wrong, retreat freely. Why was Enkrid being so cautious before the mission even started?
We're making sure that won't happen.
Finn answered, her tone becoming more rigid due to the repeated questioning.
How high and wide is that tunnel?
Huh?
If we're blocked front and back, are there any other paths?
They hadn't even taken a few steps up the hillock, yet the questions kept coming. What's up with this guy? Torres thought, tilting his head in confusion. Why was Enkrid asking all this now, after following silently until now? It couldn't be because he was scared. If he were afraid of crawling through a tunnel, he wouldn't have charged into the midst of a pack of werewolves. He certainly wouldn't have fought harpies descending from the sky.
Why? Got a bad feeling.
Torres asked. He didn't believe in superstition, but he respected Enkrid's instincts, similar to those of certain people in the border guard, who had a knack for sensing things.
It's not that.
Enkrid replied calmly. They had to go in anyway. If he said he had a bad feeling, they might change their plan. Finn looked back at Enkrid, her expression questioning if he was trying to pick a fight with her.
Got something to say?
I was just wondering what we should do if the enemy appears.
Enkrid said. Finn tilted her head to the side and then straightened it again. She felt uneasy, though she didn't know why. Was it because this guy kept bringing up doubts?
The tunnel is a main route for smugglers, not a path typically used by the cat or our side, so it's actually one of the safest routes right now.
Finn explained, reaffirming the reason they chose this path to herself as well. Torres nodded beside her. He wasn't quite at a ranger's level, but he had participated in all sorts of missions.
This should be safe enough,
he thought, agreeing with Finn. Enkrid nodded, and they stepped into the tunnel, walking a few steps inside.
What if there's an armed force waiting ahead? Are we dead?
Enkrid asked again.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Finn cursed under her breath. No matter how calm they tried to appear, they were still heading into enemy territory. Why was he bringing up such things?
If not, just leave.
Finn snapped, her frustration boiling over. Seeing Enkrid shake his head made her even more irritated.
It's not that.
Enkrid replied.
What's wrong with him?
Finn muttered, directing her frustration toward Torres. There are only so many times you can tolerate annoying comments. Was he always like this? No, something was different. Torres had no answer.
Let's go,
Enkrid said, taking the lead as Finn stopped in her tracks, angered. Just as Finn was about to say something else in her frustration, both she and Torres felt something strange. Their attention was suddenly drawn to Enkrid without them realizing it. Why? It was a heavy aura, a presence that Enkrid exuded. Torres was an elite soldier, and Finn was no less skilled. Both felt the intensity of Enkrid's aura.
Enkrid's voice broke the tension. I'm saying we should be careful.
Finn swallowed hard at Enkrid's measured words. What's with this guy? He had been annoying, but now suddenly he seemed impressive. The rising annoyance she felt vanished in an instant, a miracle.
Is this love?
Everyone in Finn's scouting unit knew she fell in love quickly. Thankfully, she never let it interfere with her work. Love is love, men are men, work is work. Finn acknowledged it. She had indeed relaxed a bit. Even if the cat got caught, it wouldn't reveal their position. Although entering the city was risky, she was confident they could escape if needed. They had planned to use a path they had saved for such situations.
Let's do that.
Finn agreed, quickly shifting her attitude. She began to step more cautiously. Torres did the same, though he briefly cast a strange look at Enkrid.
Of course, we need to be careful,
he said, then started walking.
That should do it.
Enkrid sensed the change in their attitudes. His warnings weren't just idle talk. The aura he projected was deliberate. They needed to create an opening to slit the throats of the waiting enemies and survive. On the other hand, they couldn't afford to show any weakness. They were up against elite soldiers equipped with spears and shields, laying traps with archers blocking their retreat, over 40 in total. This wasn't a situation where they could afford any mistakes. So, he made sure to instill that sense of urgency. The caution of a regular soldier differed from that of a ranger.
Strange.
Enkrid thought to himself, feeling the tension in the air. Throughout their walk by torchlight, Finn kept her head down. A ranger with the skill to effortlessly track both pathfinders and hunters, she found the traces peculiar, just as she had said.
The footprints are odd.
Finn commented. That's exactly what she had been excitedly explaining. The enemy had tried to erase their tracks, but it's impossible to completely fool the eyes of a ranger who is actively searching for clues. Enkrid hadn't planned for a direct confrontation from the start. How many times had he repeated today? There were lessons learned from all those repetitions. One of them was that a direct approach wasn't always necessary.
I've got a bad feeling about the rear.
Finn said, and Enkrid quickly responded with his prepared line. His performance didn't need to be outstanding. He had done this countless times. This moment was familiar. It had occurred many times before. He just needed to do what had to be done.
Feels like there's definitely something ahead.
Finn remarked.
Damn, what are you saying?
Torres muttered, looking around anxiously. Enkrid decided it was the right moment to speak.
Let's secure our retreat first.
By this, he meant they should turn back and clear the path. Specifically, he intended to deal with the archers who would be waiting behind them, but of course, Finn and Torres wouldn't know that. Finn and Torres turned their attention to Enkrid.
If someone blocks our retreat from behind.
Enkrid didn't need to finish the sentence.
Got it, let's go. Must be a bad day.
Torres and Finn muttered consecutively as they turned around.
Damn it.
Finn muttered as she bit her lip. Only Enkrid and Torres, who were following behind her, could barely hear her frustrated voice. The three of them had turned back not long ago when they encountered a group of soldiers. Finn, who was leaning against a gently curving corner, peeked her head out and threw the torch she was holding behind her. As the light source flew away with a whoosh, the only remaining light was the faintly glowing torch ahead. It meant that the surroundings were now dark. Torres crouched down, his gaze fixed forward. Though he couldn't see through the darkness, he had undergone training for such situations, allowing him to estimate the number of enemies and their equipment.
Damn, there are a lot of them.
There were over 20 of them, even at a glance, and their equipment was formidable. They were armed with crossbows and carried short swords at their waists, all similarly equipped. What did this indicate?
They're a trained unit.
The problem was that they weren't just some ragtag group of mercenaries. A group of trained soldiers was more dangerous than most monsters or beasts, especially in a narrow cave like this, armed with crossbows.
We're screwed.
While Torres observed the enemy, Finn was contemplating, should they turn back and head towards the crossguard instead? Was their retreat blocked, or was there something else on the path they originally intended to take? As Finn and Torres were sinking into light panic, silencing their thoughts to avoid making any noise, Enkrid suddenly burst out.
Messenger, this is Captain Rogers' messenger.
Not only did he emerge, but he also did so loudly. Torres was shocked. Finn was even more shocked. She couldn't even think of reaching out or making a sound, completely taken aback.
Crazy bastard.
It was practically a suicide move. Even if only a few of the crossbowmen fired, they'd be skewered. Enkrid surely knew this, yet he charged out without hesitation. It made sense. Roger was the name of the spear unit commander. By shouting something that would catch the enemy off guard, he had made them hesitate.
If there's no opening, you make one. Fair play? Does that save lives?
These were the words spoken by Jackson. Deceiving the enemy? Why not if necessary? Aspiring to be a knight didn't mean becoming a fool who only fought duels. Honor was for situations where it was necessary.
They set traps, used a sorcerer's tricks, and even employed lycanthropes, so what now?
But it wasn't just about deceiving the enemy and wasting the day. When the tension in his shoulders eased, his field of vision widened. A wider perspective revealed what Enkrid could do and what he could gain. Past experiences and recent ones. Today's recurring events. What to hope for and gain in these gaps. There's no need to struggle just to escape today.
A battle against many.
Fighting elite soldiers was not a common experience, especially in a situation where they were trapped and could neither advance nor retreat. This was different from the tall grass field, where they could simply avoid conflict. Pikes and arrows, the commander's orders, a front blocked by shields and a rear bombarded with arrows. One wrong move could lead to death in an instant. While one might dodge a few arrows if they really tried, how could they avoid a rain of arrows? It wasn't as if they could impersonate a knight and deflect all the arrows with a sword. Thus, there was no time to practice swordsmanship in a standoff with elite soldiers. Such battles ended in an instant. One moment of complacency could lead to death. In such moments, what should one do? What should be the weapon? The line that connects dots. Seeing the dots and connecting the lines both happen in an instant. One realization emerged.
Quick decision-making.
It's about making fast decisions to exploit fleeting opportunities. Even if they stayed here, it wouldn't take long. Perhaps only half a candle's burn time before the spear unit arrived. So what needed to be done now was clear. They needed to cut the throat of the damn crossbow unit commander and cause chaos. Without confronting the arrows, there was no hope for tomorrow.
Captain Roger? A messenger?
This place is a cave. It's difficult to recognize faces without bringing a torch closer. It's even harder to identify the uniform of Aspen's forces. And even if there was someone with keen eyesight, how could they closely observe Enkrid's swiftly approaching figure?
Enemy. Enemy.
Enkrid shouted anything that might confuse the opponent.
Damn, a monster.
The pupils of the commander, who had blocked their retreat, trembled. Of course, Enkrid couldn't see that. He didn't need to. With the distance closed and the torchlight illuminating faces, Enkrid had identified the commander. Crucially, he knew who the commander was. He charged at them.
What? Stop!
The enemy soldiers at the front shouted, but their reaction was too slow. Wasn't this momentary gap the reason for all the noise until now? Though Enkrid covered dozens of steps in an instant, he had no time to catch his breath. Shing, he drew his sword, gripped it with both hands, pulled it to the right, and swung horizontally from right to left in a high horizontal slash. The helmet and armor worn by the enemy did not protect their necks. Since the two standing to his left were of similar height, he could leave slash marks on both their necks with a single strike. Squelch. Blood gushed from the severed necks.
Oh, what the hell?
As the shocked enemy soldiers reacted, Enkrid saw the commander retreating and moved his right hand. Holding the sword with his left hand, he mimicked, striking his waist with his right hand before thrusting it forward. It was a whistling dagger, far more dangerous and sharper than a regular throwing knife, that pierced through the commander's leather helmet. If anyone survived with a blade embedded more than halfway into their head,
They wouldn't be human.
Kill him.
3 or 4 enemy soldiers drew their short swords with a clang. Enkrid, grateful that the cave was spacious, untied the buckler from his back and threw it. The round shield flew and struck the head of a soldier holding a crossbow a few steps away.
Oof.
Using the shield to buy time by hitting the crossbowman aiming at him, Enkrid pulled his sword to his chest. He then slightly angled his body to deflect the oncoming slashes of the short swords. Clang! Clink! Clang! It was a technique using the flat of the blade to parry, though it wasn't much of a technique. He was merely using his sword as a shield. Then he acted.
Ha!
He suddenly shouted, startling his opponents. Observing the positions of the soldiers and the direction of the crossbows, Enkrid leaped into action. He didn't just roll, he grabbed an enemy soldier's ankle and twisted it as he rolled to the side. The soldier lost his balance and collapsed as Enkrid twisted around like a snake standing up. With his left arm, he wrapped around the soldier's neck. With his right hand, he grabbed and twisted the enemy's right wrist upward. The short sword the enemy held dropped to the ground. The sound of the blade hitting the dirt was barely audible.
KK.
Killing the enemy was for amateurs. Keeping them alive was crucial for survival. Crossbows were deadly if fired from a distance in a cluster, but with the gap closed and a proper shield, they could be endured. And having discarded his buckler, Enkrid had found himself a new meat shield.
Reminds me of the first day.
Back then, he had also picked up a shield. This time was no different, except the shield was human rather than wooden. As he leaned against the wall, the crossbowman hesitated, as did the soldiers with short swords.
I'm alone. Come at me, all of you. Long live Captain Roger. Are you Aspen's dogs just carrying those crossbows for show?
During the brief silence, Enkrid spouted nonsense, and he kept going without stopping.
Come on, all of you. Can't even handle one person. Is that how Captain Roger taught you? It's about time they made a move.
He wasn't talking nonsense for no reason. Even if they were slow to catch on, now was the right time to act, and his expectation was met. The Aelkara-style martial arts could subdue a person without a sound. Darkness, torches, commotion, nonsense. All of these could serve to temporarily conceal one's presence.
That crazy bastard, shoot him! Hey, no, don't shoot!
Excited soldiers and the one whose neck and wrist were being held shouted alternately. This was the perfect moment. The more time they bought, the better. Even now, somewhere behind them, Finn was likely knocking out or strangling enemies one by one with Aelkara-style techniques, and Torres was probably making quiet pop sounds as he shot bolts into the throats or heads of the enemy soldiers. In a direct confrontation, the two might be at a disadvantage, but with the situation turned around like this, it was a completely different story. Now, who had the upper hand? Who was surrounded?
The day breaks, the darkness retreats, the sun shines, and the moon fades. Roger, Roger.
Enkrid continued to shout to mask the presence of Finn and Torres. He even made up a song, singing in rhythm. The commander was dead with a blade in his head, and two others had also died with screams. The chaos that followed was overwhelming, with the instigator continuing to spout nonsense. It was enough to drive anyone mad.
Damn it. What are we supposed to do?
One of the enemy soldiers was in anguish, thinking it might be better to just shoot the captive in the head. The death of their commander had left them directionless. As they hesitated, they heard the twang of a crossbow string. A bolt flew and embedded itself in the head of their captured comrade.
Oh.
Someone had finally shot.
Kill him.
It was likely muttered by the soldier who fired the shot. Even though this was a well-trained unit, they understood that such actions could lead to the worst-case scenario.
Raise the torches behind me.
At that moment, Finn and Torres were discovered. They weren't top-tier assassins after all. This was inevitable, but in the meantime, they had taken out 6 soldiers with crossbows.
Not bad.
This wasn't the first time this day had repeated. There hadn't been many days when they managed to take down 6 enemies. Next up, Enkrid pushed the human shield forward. The corpse, trembling with a quarrel bolt lodged in its head, fell forward, and just as the body was falling forward, in that split second, Enkrid pulled out the whistling daggers from his side and waist and threw them. Extending his elbow, he flicked his fingers. Skipping the step of dropping his hand, he quickly moved. In the blink of an eye, 6 whistling daggers flew out. A sharp sound. A dull thud. After creating 6 more corpses like that, only 1 soldier with a crossbow and 2 soldiers in a defensive stance with short swords remained. It all happened in an instant. For the enemy soldiers, it was a nightmare, and just as they were about to finish them off without a fight,
Forward.
a deep voice echoed through the passageway. It was Roger, the spear unit commander, announcing his arrival. He came from the opposite end of the passageway that Enkrid's group had traversed. The synchronized footsteps shook the ground and the air. The remaining soldiers from the archer unit gathered to one side. Roger and his unit appeared, illuminated by 10 or so torches. He was calm, scanning the area with an indifferent expression, despite seeing his fallen comrades. One would expect some degree of panic if the group tasked with blocking the escape had been decimated. 30 trained elite spear soldiers. Roger's gaze briefly landed on Enkrid, and then on Finn.
You're lucky, like a wildcat.
It's not luck, it's skill, bastard.
The two glared at each other as if they could kill with their eyes. The crackling of the torches echoed through the silent cave. It was already clear from the first encounter that there was a personal history between the two. Enkrid didn't pay much attention to that. Instead, as Roger and his spear unit stopped at a certain distance, he moved again. With a swift leap, he lunged towards the 3 gathered archers. He thrust his sword, piercing another enemy's throat. As he retrieved his sword with a sickening squelch, the sound of a crossbow string twanging reached his ears. Enkrid quickly ducked. The quarrel bolt whizzed past, just grazing his hair.
That was close.
That was indeed a stroke of luck. He hadn't expected them to fire a quarrel bolt so suddenly. Realizing this luck was rare, he fully capitalized on it.
I can see everything.
He pretended to charge at the soldier who had fired the crossbow, only to veer off and stab his sword into another enemy's head. After partially splitting the skull, Enkrid retrieved his sword and pretended to retreat, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the remaining enemy. The increased light from the torches held by the spear unit illuminated the area, making Enkrid's expression and gaze clearly visible to the enemy soldier. The soldier, seeing Enkrid's expression, assumed there was an enemy behind him, especially since several had already been killed from behind. But as the soldier turned around in alarm, he saw only darkness. The darkness of the unlit passage, the cave, and the faintly falling dirt. As the soldier turned his head back, he saw a glimmer of light. It was the light reflected off a heavy, large piece of metal. Just as the soldier turned his gaze back, Enkrid lunged again, stabbing the soldier in the neck and killing him. This, too, happened in an instant. It was at this moment that Roger, unable to hold back, was about to shout,
Charge.
Message from Risha.
Enkrid played another trick. Hearing that, Roger hesitated. Resha was the name of the key wizard involved in this matter. How could he not be surprised?
Run.
And then Enkrid suddenly shouted.
What?
Torres reflexively ran, even as he questioned the command. Finn, without a word, grabbed 2 crossbows and followed Enkrid's lead.
Capture them.
Roger's furious shout echoed behind them. The spear unit wasn't as heavily armored as the heavy infantry, so they wouldn't be impossible to pursue. Once they got out of the cave, they could run even while holding their spears. As Enkrid ran, thoughts raced through his mind. The same went for Torres and Finn. They had many questions about the unfolding situation, but there was no time or breath to ask. Now was the time to run.
Catch them.
The enemy's shout rang out, and of course they began to chase madly. Enkrid glanced back and then subtly changed direction. A pile of dirt fell right where he was about to pass. It wasn't a sign of collapse, just a symbol of bad luck.
No, maybe today is a lucky day.
A quarrel had merely grazed his head, so he could consider himself lucky. The spear, angled forward, brushed against the top of the cave. The enemy began to run fiercely. They had already fought one battle.
Not to the point of exhaustion, though.
The only issue was the lack of light. Finn, a ranger, had the skills of a pathfinder who could see the way with eyes on the soles of her feet. She wouldn't trip in the darkness. The same went for Enkrid. He had been mimicking Finn's footsteps all along. Even if not perfectly, he could roughly guess the shape of the ground with his feet. Moreover, how many times had they traveled this path? If he fell and broke his nose, it wouldn't be a matter of talent, but rather a sign that he used his head as a helmet stand. Enkrid had an excellent memory. For various reasons, Finn and Enkrid could run through the darkness without issue.
Shit.
Only Torres struggled. Every time he stepped into a dip, he flinched in surprise. Still, with his exceptional reflexes, he quickly regained his balance and kept running. The sound of torches. Occasionally, the sound of spears scraping the ceiling of the cave. Aside from that, it was just the heavy breathing of the chase. While Finn and Torres were the lightest on their feet, it wasn't enough to outrun their pursuers. It felt like they could be caught at any moment. As they ran, moonlight started to shine ahead. The entrance to the small tunnel. Finn ran up the slope first and tossed a crossbow behind her. Thinking it might be useful as a throwing weapon rather than just discarding it, Enkrid picked it up and threw it with all his might. The enemy, chasing closely behind, raised his shield, which had been at his side, to the front. It wasn't made of very strong material, as wood chips flew through the air and the crossbow bounced off. It slowed the pursuit slightly, but wasn't significant. Torres had fallen slightly behind, so Enkrid threw it to help. Torres saw this and nodded at Enkrid, a gesture of thanks in his eyes and nod.
Even in this situation, giving thanks.
Finn was the first to get outside, and Enkrid also reached the entrance, placing his hands on the edge of the slope to pull himself up. As dust and dirt fell below, Torres ducked his head.
Wait a minute.
Suddenly, Torres spoke, drawing a dagger with his left hand and planting it into the ground on the slope tunnel, then turning his body sideways.
Oh, what is this now?
He leaned against the partially inclined wall, using his hand to steady himself. Unable to support himself with just his feet, he used the dagger to maintain balance. He threw the dagger backward.
This is something new.
Enkrid hadn't seen this tactic in today's events, but then again, each repetition of today wasn't exactly the same, so it wasn't too surprising. The dagger flew back with a whistling sound. Despite having thrown away their torches, the enemy soldiers skillfully blocked the incoming dagger with their shields.
You bastards.
Two soldiers who blocked the dagger cursed harshly. Their eyes glinted fiercely, and it seemed they wouldn't let them die peacefully if caught. Of course, Enkrid had been captured before. Being caught didn't usually end well. You could end up being skewered like a kebab, or have a blade stuck in your head. In truth, no death was really welcome.
Damn it.
Seeing the dagger blocked, Torres clicked his tongue. Even with the torches and moonlight, it was still a dark place. To block that, it was clear that no ordinary training could produce soldiers like these. Torres was convinced by the soldiers' ability to block the dagger,
They're at the border guard level.
which meant that getting caught was a death sentence. Even though Enkrid was right beside him, reaching out a hand,
This isn't good.
How many do you think we can take on?
he asked while clasping hands with Enkrid.
If we meet them separately, we could handle them all. But if they come in a group like that, well,
Enkrid also seemed to have no solution, but oddly enough, there was a faint lack of tension on his face. Why is he so calm? Torres wondered as he quickly climbed up. One of the spearmen behind them showed a similar skill to Torres. He threw a short sword like a throwing knife. Impressive. Enkrid thought as he drew his sword and deflected it. The blade of the short sword got caught about halfway down his sword. The short sword ricocheted off and embedded itself in the ground nearby. The blade reflected the red and blue hues of the moonlight and the torches below.
Hurry.
Enkrid's single word after deflecting the sword. Torres moved even faster.
Get out.
Finn, who had been the first to get out, quickly drew the pulley of the last crossbow and fixed the string, then shouted. As Enkrid and Torres moved to the sides, Finn pulled the trigger on the crossbow. With a thud, a quarrel shot into the hole, casting shadows due to the torches. Since it wasn't a repeating crossbow, they were limited to one shot. A thud was heard, but there was no time to check if it hit a head or was blocked by a shield.
Run.
This time, Finn spoke first and moved. Enkrid and Torres followed, Torres in the middle, Enkrid at the rear. They headed towards the camp where the main group had been stationed. As she ran, Finn kept thinking.
Where should we go?
Towards the main camp? What if this is a trap they've set up? But if we head towards the river, won't there be Aspen's rangers? No, causing this much commotion will attract beasts and monsters. Even if we could handle a dozen ghouls, what if we're unlucky enough to encounter a colony? Facing a colony of beasts or monsters with a small force is suicidal. There's a vast difference between a group of wandering beasts and a colony, a structured group called a colony. As a ranger, she knew well the ecology of beasts and monsters.
What's the worst-case scenario here?
Getting caught, beasts and monsters are something to worry about later.
To the camp.
Enkrid made the decision, ending Finn's dilemma. She glanced back. She could see Enkrid following at the rear. All three were panting, but his eyes and expression seemed oddly calm.
Why?
Why does he look so calm? Oh, his mouth is closed. Even while running like this, he wasn't panting. She herself was starting to run out of breath. Isn't his armor heavier than hers? He's even carrying a long sword at his waist, yet he looks so at ease. Finn couldn't ask why he was heading in that direction. She just had to make a decision. Enkrid didn't interfere further with Finn's decision. He likely thought that no matter where they went now, they were doomed.
He'll manage on his own.
She would probably follow Enkrid's lead and head towards the camp, retracing their steps as much as possible. That's a ranger's instinct, to follow a path deemed safe. Having experienced several todays, they knew this. As they ran back, Enkrid's hands began to move busily. He unfastened his sword from his belt, and while running, started swinging it from side to side. More precisely, he stabbed the sword towards the ground and then lifted it upwards. Following the movement of the sword in its sheath, flat stones lifted into the air. Enkrid used the sword as a bat and swung them backward.
Huh.
More than 5 spearmen were following closely behind. They were some of the fastest in their unit. One of the ones at the front sneered. It seemed laughable that they were trying to block their path with flat stones. He didn't even bother to raise his shield, instead thrusting his spear forward. There was no need to dodge. He intended to knock the stones aside without losing speed. The spearman thought everything was going according to plan. It would have been, except for the strange long shadow that arched into the air after hitting the stone.
Eek.
It was a snake. A snake had been hiding under the flat stone.
Damn it.
The spearman quickly drew his short sword and swung it. He severed the snake's body. It wasn't a beast, but it was venomous. One of the spearmen was unlucky. A viper had sprung out from under the stone, coiled around his shin, and bit into the leg between his boot and armor. The venom wasn't lethal, but it brought pain and a tingling sensation in the leg. The bitten spearman pulled out a dagger and stabbed the snake's head. Blood and yellow fluid flowed from the mouth of the dead snake.
Viper.
The soldier tore off his dagger sheath, using it as a makeshift tourniquet above his calf. He naturally stopped in his tracks. It was also natural for the others to hesitate. Damn it, a viper. Crafty bastards. The soldier, who had been bitten, gritted his teeth and looked ahead. In the meantime, Enkrid was skillfully hitting stones with his sheathed sword. The first stones had snakes under them. After that, there were regular stones mixed in. Without knowledge to differentiate, they could only dodge or knock them aside.
Damn bastards.
The pursuing commander, seeing the situation, glared. They were so close to catching that sneaky woman.
Block with your shields and keep running.
His decision was effective. Whether it was stones or snakes, the soldiers could not be stopped by merely peeking through their shields. Of course, Enkrid never expected to fend them off with just snakes.
What I learned from Enri is really coming in handy.
He remembered being told that there were vipers under flat, clay-colored stones. It just so happened that they passed through this area and used that knowledge. It was quite useful. He had taken down one enemy and slowed the others.
Huff, Huff, why are we heading to the camp?
With the enemy's pace slowing, Finn adjusted her speed and came alongside him, asking the question. Torres, curious as well, joined them. Enkrid glanced back and spoke.
Huff, to face those numbers, we need our allies.
Finn frowned at that.
Ha ha, the camp is already empty. My troops have moved.
Finn misunderstood. Torres misunderstood too. Enkrid pretended to be surprised and said,
We can't change course now. We'll go around the camp and then decide.
He naturally took the lead in the conversation, dropping the formalities. Finn and Torres realized there was no other option. They had to go. Their backs tingled with tension. They saw the pursuers catching up, their breath visible in the cold air. Seeing them running in formation was impressive. How well trained must these elite soldiers be to do that? It was only then that Finn realized who their pursuers were.
Damn, it looks like those Greyhound bastards.
Greyhound, also known as the Persistent Lovers Unit. They had a significant history with Enkrid. Mitch Hurrier was part of that unit. They had once sent a half-blood fairy disguised as a gift called the Whistle Dagger. It meant their opponents were an elite force, almost as skilled as the border guard. Enkrid, already knowing this, pretended to be surprised.
Really?
However, the problem was that his tone seemed strangely relaxed, which could be interpreted as a sign of confidence. Both Finn and Torres, apart from Enkrid, had no capacity to worry about that. The stronger the opponent, the better. Enkrid thought so to himself. Before today, there had been 78 such days. During that time, what had Enkrid done? He had honed his ability to make quick decisions when facing dozens of elite soldiers. He also extracted information from a man named Roger by asking seemingly random questions. He was now pouring out everything he had learned. All three started to pick up speed. Seeing the pursuers closing in gave them a burst of energy.
Huff, huff, huff.
Torres regulated his breathing as he ran beside them.
Goddamn bastards.
Finn did the same. Judging by her cursing, she really seemed to dislike those soldiers. On the way to the camp, Enkrid deliberately took a detour. Finn noticed but said nothing. There was a saying that a ranger should go first in such situations, and it was only natural for her to take the lead. But Enkrid calmly took charge and went ahead, so what else could she do but follow? They reached the camp. The burrows they had dug, now covered with dirt to erase the traces. A few trees stood idly on one side, along with some small mounds, and on the other side a sight they hadn't expected. A long, mournful howl echoed. It was a pack of werewolves.
Damn it.
There were over 20 werewolves, creatures they couldn't guarantee to defeat even in perfect condition. The one at the front seemed to be leading them, indicating that they had formed a colony.
This is the worst.
Finn almost gave up on life at that moment. Torres was busy darting his eyes around, trying to grasp the situation. Only Enkrid remained calm, taking a breath in preparation for what was next.
This is the turning point.
It was partly a gamble, but repeating today had taught him how to make a gamble not just a gamble. In other words, it was a gamble where he knew how to win. Enkrid took a step forward, ready to win.